This happened a few winters ago. I had just finalized my divorce about 6 months earlier, and to put it lightly, I needed a reset. Christina, my girlfriend at the time, suggested we take a trip somewhere quiet, something different from the chaos I'd been dealing with. We found a rental on a lake in upstate New York, and I booked it for a week without much thought. The place was exactly what I was looking for. A modern but cozy house positioned right on the lake, surrounded by woods, with only a handful of other properties scattered along the shoreline. Most of them were empty. It wasn't exactly peak season for lakefront living. I welcomed that, though. I really just wanted to be as far from civilization as possible. The host wasn't going to be there, but he gave us some detailed instructions on where to find the keys, some stuff about the house, you know, all the standard Airbnb stuff. We arrived in the morning, and when we got there was a small package sitting on the front steps waiting for us. There was no return address, just a little handwritten note that said, "Enjoy your stay. Make sure to stay warm." That part was kind of cute. But there was something else in the package. A tiny box of matches. We figured it was some kind of welcome gift, a weird one, but harmless enough. Christina laughed and made a joke about how the upstate people have always been a little odd, and that was that. But I remember, even then, when I picked up the box of matches, the wood felt slightly damp and smelled faintly of smoke, like it had been used recently, like someone had lit one just before sealing the box. The next 2 days were exactly what we wanted. Long hikes through the snow, hot drinks by the fireplace, total peace and quiet. Oh yeah, I should probably mention that the snow had been steadily falling since we arrived. Not quite a blizzard, because there wasn't that much wind or fog, but there was enough snow to make the landscape feel untouched. It was perfect. I think now's a good time to describe the layout of the house, at least somewhat. The master bedroom, where we slept, was on the second floor. It had these massive windows across from the bed that overlooked the lake. The roof, or at least the windows, must have been pretty thin, because we could hear the patter of snowflakes from inside, which was a really nice touch. There was also a skylight, so we could fall asleep to the beautiful sky and snow. Though one night, I remember, I thought I heard something louder than snow, like something heavy had landed on the roof. I waited, listening. Then, nothing. I told myself it was ice falling from a tree branch. It had to be. Sometime after midnight on the third night, I woke up to a sound. It was barely audible over the wind and snow, but it stood out. The snowfall had gotten considerably heavier since I had fallen asleep, and the outdoors was starting to resemble more of a full-on blizzard. I shifted my focus back to the sound and realized why it stuck out. It was man-made, almost mechanical, unlike the natural sounds you'd expect to hear out in the wilderness. I quietly got out of bed, careful not to wake Christina, and made my way across the room. I looked out the window and saw the last thing I expected to see, a snowmobile. It was moving slowly across the ice. I know it's not the most abnormal thing. People drive snowmobiles on frozen lakes all the time, but I was just so confused given how late it was. Like I said, the snow was falling more heavily now, so visibility wasn't great, but I could still make out the shape. The driver was moving cautiously, like they weren't completely sure about the ice. And then, they just stopped entirely, right in the middle of the lake. I watched as the person climbed off and started waving their arms. Big, desperate motions, like they were in distress. It looked like they were shouting, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. To my horror, I realized they were facing in the direction of our house. Did they know we were there? It was impossible, right? Either way, it looked like they needed help. So I woke Christina and told her what was happening. Then I got dressed, went downstairs, and stepped outside onto the deck. It was freezing, the kind of cold that feels like it's sinking into your bones. As soon as I opened the door, I got hit with another surprise. The person on the ice was a woman. I could tell because she was now shouting clearly, "Help, please, my little boy, he's lost in the snowstorm." Her voice cracked, and it sounded like she was either crying or maybe laughing. I wasn't sure. It wasn't a question of whether or not I'd help. If there was a child out there in that weather, all alone, they weren't going to last long. I laced my boots and made my way toward the lake, telling Christina to stay inside. As I approached the woman, I started to make out more details of her appearance. She was bundled up in a thick fur coat, and her hair was pulled back into a tight braid. Her face was pale, not from the cold, but like it hadn't seen the sun in weeks. And her eyes, they didn't blink. The ice was completely solid. There wasn't even a chance of falling through. So I started to relax, knowing that it would have been impossible for the boy to have broken through. Then she said something strange. "He ran away from home," she told me. That gave me pause. I had expected her to say something like he'd fallen off her snowmobile and she hadn't noticed. And then I started to think, how the hell do you not notice your own kid falling off a snowmobile? The adrenaline must have been clouding my judgment, because I hadn't even thought about that until right then. I was just about to ask her for more details when she said something that made me stop cold. "Did you bring the matches?" For a split second, I had no idea what she was talking about. And then, it all clicked. The matches. That package from the first day. The note. She had left it. Not our host. Before I could react, she reached into her coat and pulled out a gun. Her hand didn't shake. She demanded my wallet and phone. I gave them to her. I had no other choice. The whole interaction happened within the span of not even 30 seconds. She didn't say another word. She climbed back onto the snowmobile and disappeared into the white. But as she turned, I swear to God, I saw her looking not at me, but at the bedroom window, at Christina. I ran, as fast as I could, screaming for Christina to call the police. She was already on the phone when I burst through the door. I locked it, pacing, shaking, half expecting to see that snowmobile circling back. The cops showed up about an hour later. By that point, the fresh snowfall had already covered any track that woman had left behind. Christina was hysterical, but I was mostly angry. I had come here for peace. There was hope, though. I couldn't think of a reliable way that woman had gotten her snowmobile onto the lake, so I expected the police to at least find the vehicle abandoned somewhere. Unfortunately, I was wrong. They searched the area and found an old boat ramp on the far side of the lake. Their best guess was that she had come from there. I was furious and insisted they keep looking, but they told me the same thing I already knew. There wasn't much they could do. Even if she left something behind, they'd never find it in all the snow. With Christina's help, I tried tracking my phone. It was already offline. The one good thing about the whole ordeal was that the Airbnb host refunded the entire trip. He sounded genuine on the phone and confirmed that he knew nothing about a welcome package. But something about the whole thing didn't sit right with me. How could that woman have possibly known we'd be staying there? Why go to such elaborate lengths, just for a wallet and phone? I couldn't help but think the host had something to do with it, but I had no proof. I brought it up with Airbnb, but they were about as helpful as you'd expect. I know I've always been a paranoid guy, but for the longest time after that, I couldn't help but feel that my ex-wife had something to do with it. It honestly makes me angry writing about this. I can just imagine her stupid face laughing at my expense. I've since come to terms with how likely that possibility is, but the whole thing still doesn't make any sense. Even now, unless it wasn't about stealing. Unless she wasn't alone. Because sometimes, when I can't sleep, I still see her, standing in the blizzard, smiling, waiting for me to strike a match. My family owns a lake house in Northern California. We only visit for a couple of short weeks out of the year, usually during prime-time summer weather. It's 2 stories tall, with an attic that's barely big enough to stand in if you're tall. When my younger sister and I were little, we'd climb up there with sleeping bags and pretend we were camping. We'd even bring our puppy up with us, despite the stifling heat. There was one small window in the attic that looked out over the lake. I remember being maybe 8 or 9 and peering through it watching people down at the docks, sometimes feeling like a spy in a treehouse. It was one of my favorite things, a quiet little world above the rest of the house. But even back then, there was something weird about that attic. The wood creaked a little too much. The air felt heavy, like it had been still for too long. Sometimes, when we left the hatch open by accident, we'd come back and find it shut, though my parents always said it was the draft. When we got too big for our attic campouts, that was that. Childhood fades fast when you're not looking, but I always thought about that little window, watching, being watched. When our grandparents died, my parents inherited most of their furniture. We had some space to fit the bigger pieces downstairs, but a lot of the smaller stuff, frames, boxes, antique tools, went straight into the attic. My parents didn't really have the heart to get rid of any of it. They said it was all they had left of Nana and Pop. It felt bittersweet putting their things up there, like we were sealing away the past. Over time, the attic went from a place of memory to just another storage space. My sister and I avoided it, mostly out of habit, but every now and then, I'd feel drawn to that hatch again. I'd think I heard something up there. Not footsteps exactly, just shifting. The house sat empty most of the year. My family got busier. College, work, life. My parents didn't want to rent it out because of the antiques. They were afraid of stuff getting broken or stolen. So the place was mostly abandoned, aside from landscapers who came by once a month to keep it from looking completely overgrown. But a few years ago, that changed. My parents met a local veteran, an older guy who restored antique furniture. He was a small, wiry man with a disfigured jaw and deep creases on his face. His beard was wild and unwashed, his eyes sharp and unreadable. I thought he looked creepy. My sister agreed, but my dad bonded with him instantly over their shared military background. "He's a good man," Dad said. "He's seen things. Guys like that deserve a break." I didn't agree. Neither did Mom, but Dad was the one who signed the lease. The old man moved in for a full year. We weren't around to see much of it, but every so often the landscapers would check in with my parents. They didn't like him. They said he'd sit for hours on the porch, just staring, not watching the lake, but the kids down on the shore. At first, they brushed it off as weird old guy behavior, but then they said they caught him doing things I won't write down. Mom was furious. She begged Dad to break the lease, but he refused. "We have no proof," he said. "It's hearsay." The lease ran its course. My dad made up an excuse about needing plumbing work done. The old man left quietly, but I still remember how Mom insisted we change the locks, and how Dad never did. About a year after the man moved out, my younger sister graduated college, and my parents decided it was the perfect excuse to take a family trip to the lake house again. They booked time off, packed everything up, and even brought along their new black lab mix named Bear. My sister hadn't met him yet, so she was excited. We drove in just before sunset. The road into the property felt more overgrown than I remembered, as if the trees had crept closer during the year of silence. The lake was calm, almost eerily so, and the windows of the house were dark. It looked different, like something had shifted. The moment we stepped inside, Bear started pacing. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just walked in slow circles near the foot of the stairs, ears perked, tail stiff. He kept glancing up at the ceiling like he was waiting for something. "Probably the long drive," Dad said. "He'll settle." But he didn't. We decided to leave Bear inside while we grabbed dinner in town. The fridge was empty, and no one wanted to cook after the drive. We were gone maybe an hour. When we came back, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the usual peaceful kind, a kind of held breath, stillness, as if the house had frozen in our absence. Then I saw Bear. He was sprawled out at the base of the stairs, panting. There was blood smeared across the wooden floor beneath him. My sister screamed. My mom reached for her phone. Dad went straight to the kitchen and came back with a long knife. He didn't speak. Neither did I. We moved room by room. Every creak of the floor felt sharper. Every shadow looked too long. Bear whined softly from behind us as we searched. We found nothing. Until we got to the second floor. That's when Dad stopped dead. I was a step behind him and didn't understand at first. Then I followed his gaze. The attic hatch was open. Not wide, just a crack, but enough. And from inside, shining faintly through that crack, was the unmistakable flicker of a flashlight. My breath caught. I didn't move. Neither did Dad. He turned slowly, handed me the knife, and yanked the hatch open. Then, without a word, he climbed up the ladder into the dark. I stood there, blade in my hand, heart thudding so hard I thought it would burst through my ribs. I didn't hear a struggle, no noise at all. Then, minutes later, Dad climbed back down, calmly. "It's him," he whispered. "The old man." I stared at him. "What?" "He's up there. He's hurt." Mom came running. When she heard, she started yelling. She'd already called the cops. Dad tried to explain that he didn't think the man meant harm, that he looked weak, barely conscious, but Mom wasn't having it. She was shaking with rage. "The lock," she said. "You told me you'd change the lock." Dad didn't answer. The police arrived and went into the attic. They brought the man down. He was gaunt, pale, covered in dust. But worst of all, he had our house key in his pocket. The same one my dad had never changed. Bear survived, barely. He had a stab wound along his side, like someone had lashed out in fear or desperation. The vet said it was lucky we found him when we did. The cops questioned the old man, but it wasn't clear what charges could stick. Technically, he hadn't broken in. He used a key. There was no sign of theft. He didn't even have food or gear. Just dust and silence. My mom begged Dad to press charges. He refused. "It's sad," he said. "That's all." He had nowhere else to go. My sister wouldn't speak to him for days. That was one of the biggest fights my parents ever had. I remember sitting on the back porch the next morning, the sun just starting to rise, and hearing them through the thin kitchen walls. My mom called my dad irresponsible, selfish, naive. Said he had put all of us in danger just to protect some broken old man. My dad didn't yell. He never did. He just kept saying the same thing. He didn't hurt us. He was just lost. But I couldn't stop thinking about how he had stayed hidden for so long, how no one had noticed, how even Bear, a full-grown lab, hadn't sensed him until it was too late. How many nights had that man been up there, listening? How many times had I stood under the attic, unaware that someone was just a few feet above me? My mom changed the locks herself the next day, paid a locksmith out of her own pocket. She made sure every window latched, every door had a new key. She wanted to leave immediately, but Dad insisted on staying the full trip. "We can't run from this place," he said. I didn't agree. The rest of that week was strange. We tried to make it normal. Barbecue dinners, board games, wine by the fire. But it didn't feel like our house anymore. Every time I walked past the attic hatch, I felt like it was watching me, like it wanted to open again. One night, I couldn't sleep. I got up around 2 a.m. and walked quietly to the kitchen to get a drink. The house was dead silent, except for the occasional creak of old wood. I turned and looked up the stairs. The attic hatch was still closed, but for a moment, I swear, I heard something up there. Not footsteps, not movement, just breathing. Slow, labored, barely audible. Then nothing. I didn't tell anyone. I figured I was just freaking myself out. The next day, I went up into the attic for the first time in years. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe closure. The air was thick with dust. Boxes everywhere. Grandpa's old fishing gear. Nana's porcelain lamps. The flashlight beam caught something on the far wall. A small mirror. It was propped up just right, facing the hatch, as if someone had been watching from up there for a long time. I climbed back down, hands shaking, Later that evening, my dad asked me to sit with him outside. He lit a fire and passed me a beer. "I know what you're thinking," he said, "but I don't think he was trying to hurt us. I think he just couldn't let go." Let go of what? This place, life, the past, maybe everything. I didn't respond, but I kept thinking about that mirror, the way it faced the hatch, the way the beam caught it perfectly. That wasn't memory. That was intent. We went home at the end of that trip. None of us said it, but we all felt the same thing, relief. Leaving that place behind felt like exhaling after holding your breath underwater. We didn't talk about it much after that. It became one of those strange family events everyone quietly agrees to forget. But for months afterward, I had trouble sleeping. Not from nightmares, just from a deep, gnawing discomfort. Like I'd left something unfinished. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced I'd heard a creak from the attic, even though I was in my college apartment. My mind played tricks on me. Or maybe it didn't. Sometimes, when I opened my closet, I swore I smelled dust. That attic dust, that rotting, old wood smell. My mom made my dad promise never to rent the lake house again. And he did. But that didn't stop the house from feeling inhabited. Months later, a neighbor left a voicemail on my mom's phone. Said they'd seen lights on in the attic, at night, twice. My dad told her it was probably just a faulty sensor, or the landscapers, or maybe a reflection off the lake. But we all knew better. We sent a handyman to check, paid him extra to be thorough. He found nothing, no signs of break-in, no disturbances, nothing touched, except the mirror. It had been turned, no longer facing the hatch. Now it faced the window, outward, like someone or something had stopped watching the house and started watching the lake. I asked my dad again, "Did he ever give you back the key?" He didn't answer, just stared at the fire in the fireplace, hands clenched tighter than they should have been. "I don't think he left," I said quietly. Dad didn't look up. "I think he became part of it," I added. And for a long moment, neither of us said a word, just the crackle of firewood and the faint creak from above. Summer came again the following year. None of us wanted to go back, but my dad insisted. He said we shouldn't let fear dictate our lives, that the lake house was still ours, that it was just a house. So, for the first time since the incident, we returned. The house looked the same. The trees, the porch, even the half-rusted wind chime that never made any sound. But something was off. Hard to explain. Like the place had aged differently than everything else around it. Like the air had thickened. I didn't say anything at first, but I noticed Bear, the dog, refused to go up the stairs. He'd sit at the bottom and growl. Not bark. Just a low, uneasy growl when anyone got near the attic hatch. My mom noticed too. That first night, she brought Bear into her room and locked the door. I was in the guest room, scrolling on my phone, trying to ignore the unease in my chest. The power flickered once, then came back. A minute later, it flickered again. I stood up to check the hallway, just in time to see the attic hatch swing slightly open. No wind, no vibration, just the slow, deliberate shift of wood sliding back. I froze. My voice wouldn't come out, my feet wouldn't move, and then, just as slowly, it closed again. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in my room, door locked, eyes fixed on the hallway through the crack beneath the door. In the morning, I asked everyone if they'd noticed anything strange. Dad said no. Mom hesitated, then nodded. "I dreamed about him," she whispered. "Who?" "The old man. I saw him in the mirror, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at something behind me." I didn't ask more, because I'd had the same dream. We cut the trip short, 3 days early. No one objected. As we were packing, I climbed into the attic one last time, not to look for anything, just to see. Everything was where it had been, except the mirror. It was broken, A perfect crack right down the center, and in the dust near the frame, a single word had been scratched with a nail. Stay. We haven't been back to the lake house since. My parents never officially put it up for sale, but no one mentions it anymore. It's like a dead family member, technically still part of us, but never spoken of at dinner. Sometimes I check the weather up there, just out of curiosity, just to see if it's snowing, or if it's raining, or if the sky is unusually still. And every now and then, I'll dream of the attic again. Not the one from when I was a kid, full of dusty heirlooms and flashlight adventures, but the other one, the dark one, the quiet one, the one that watches. Bear's better now. He still doesn't like small spaces, and if you close a door behind him, he'll whimper until you open it again. The vet says it's probably trauma. I say he remembers. So do I. Last week, my sister called me, said she was organizing some old photo albums and found a picture from one of our summer trips. We were maybe 10 or 11 in the photo, grinning, holding popsicles, standing in front of the lake house. But in the attic window, behind us, there was a shadow, a figure, standing just far enough back that you couldn't see the face, just the outline. And it wasn't one of us. She asked if I remembered who was home that day. I said I didn't, but I did. It was just us, and that window had been closed and locked. That photo's still sitting on my desk. I've looked at it a dozen times, trying to convince myself there's an explanation, a trick of the light, a coat hanging too close to the glass, a neighbor's kid. But every time I look, I can feel it again. The attic, still watching, still waiting. This happened last summer. I was 20 years old. My name is Kevin. My friend James comes from a very wealthy family, like stupidly wealthy. His dad's some kind of intellectual property lawyer who contracts with the US government. I never really understood what he did, but I knew it meant James didn't have to worry about money at all. They had properties scattered all across the country, a few international ones too. One of those was a house on a relatively large but quiet lake. It wasn't the kind of place tourists flocked to. It was secluded, lined with private docks, and surrounded by dense woods. A lake for people who wanted to disappear for a while. The lake itself wasn't huge. You could see houses on the opposite shore, though they always seemed eerily dark and still. Most of them were vacation homes that barely saw visitors. That kind of emptiness made the place feel exclusive, yeah, but also unreal. Like it had been cut off from the rest of the world. James's parents were rarely around. That meant he pretty much had full access to the lake house year-round. Every now and then, he'd invite a group of us for parties, wild ones. With no close neighbors, we could be as loud as we wanted. But this night wasn't like that. It was just the two of us. I'd just gotten out of a 3-year relationship. I won't get into it here, but it left me completely wrecked. James suggested a chill weekend at the lake. No drama, no pressure. Just a couple beers and maybe some fishing. I needed the reset. We were sitting on the dock, sipping from half-warm bottles, letting our legs dangle just above the black water. The night was dead quiet. No wind, no insects. Just the occasional creak of the wooden dock beneath us. And that's when I noticed it. At first, I thought it was a reflection, a glint of light off something on the far shore. Maybe a window or someone's porch light flickering through the trees. But it didn't stop. It blinked, and then it blinked again. On, office 3 short flashes, then 3 long ones, then 3 short again. Dude, I said, nudging James, you seeing this? He squinted across the lake. What the hell? Then he sat up straighter. That's Morse code, he said, almost too casually. I blinked. You know Morse code. Number, but everyone knows that one. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. That's SOS. He pulled out his phone. Look it up. I did. He was right. We stared across the lake, silent now. The flashing continued, methodical and unbroken, for another full minute. And then it stopped. Just like that, No fading, no flickering, just gone. "What do you think it is?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. James didn't answer right away. Then, "Could be a prank." "In the middle of nowhere?" He gave me a look. "You have a better theory?" I didn't. We sat there for another few minutes, both of us locked on the place where the light had been. The house it came from was dark again. No motion, no flicker of movement. Just shadows, glass, and trees. James stood up suddenly. "We should check it out." "What?" "Number, we've done way dumber shit than this." "That was before I had a pending DUI, I muttered. "You remember that, right? I get caught out here with booze and no license, and I'm screwed." He paused. "Okay, so we won't drive." I stared at him. "Don't say it." "We kayak." I didn't want to do it. I told James that, repeatedly, but he knew me too well. Knew how to twist things just enough to make me go along. He said if it really was nothing, we'd be back in 20 minutes, that it would be a dumb story to laugh about later. But if it wasn't nothing, I don't remember agreeing. Not exactly. But 10 minutes later, we were dragging his dad's old kayak to the edge of the lake. The thing was heavier than it looked, and cold. Not just metal in the evening cold. Cold like it had been underwater, even though it hadn't. We pushed off silently. At first, we were laughing. There was something exhilarating about it, like sneaking into a movie as a kid. Dumb, but thrilling. We paddled slowly, trying to keep our balance, the water rippling quietly around us. No moon that night. Only the distant pinpoints of stars and the reflections of a few scattered dock lights around the lake. But the closer we got to the far side, the quieter we got. There was a heaviness in the air now, a pressure, like the lake was holding its breath. James stopped paddling first. "Do you see it?" he whispered. I followed his gaze. The house, big, empty, black windows like sockets in a skull. No porch light, no movement, but something about it felt wrong, like it was watching us. We drifted silently the last stretch. The dock connected to the house was half sunken, warped, broken boards jutting out at odd angles. Half of it had collapsed into the water like it had been pulled down by something. "Can't tie off here," James muttered. "Yeah, no kidding." We aimed for the small embankment nearby. The yard was steep but manageable. We pulled the kayak up onto the rocks as quietly as we could. I stepped onto the grass and instantly felt it. Soggy, cold, too cold. I looked back once toward the lake. It was still, dead still, no wind, no crickets, just our breathing. We crept toward the house, trying to stay low. There were no obvious lights, no signs of life. Just windows covered in grime and warped wood siding that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. We didn't go to the front door. That felt too exposed, too stupid. Instead, we circled around, staying close to the walls. Eventually, we found a window low enough to climb through, one that was already unlocked. That should have been the first red flag, but we were already in too deep. James slipped through first, then me. We landed in what looked like a living room, only it was empty. Not vacant, empty, sterile empty. No furniture, no dust, no cobwebs, no junk. It was like no one had ever lived there, like no one was supposed to. We exchanged a glance. James mouthed, "What the fuck?" I shook my head. Then we heard it. Creak. Upstairs. We froze. That creak wasn't the kind a house made when it settled. It was a footstep, a deliberate one. James looked at me, eyes wide. He mouthed, "We need to leave." But I was already thinking the same thing. The problem was, we were already inside. And the window we came through? It had slammed shut behind us. I don't know how. There hadn't been any wind. We hadn't touched it. But there it was, closed and locked, as if it had never been opened. We backed away from the center of the room, trying to stay low, trying not to breathe too loudly. The wooden floor creaked under our weight, though the creak felt muted, like the house was absorbing sound. Everything about the place felt off. Too clean, too quiet. And then James pointed. A narrow staircase leading upward to where we had heard the sound. "Just look," he whispered. "Real quick, if it's someone in trouble." I didn't respond, but I moved. We crept toward the stairs. My heart was hammering in my chest. Every step felt like it took minutes. The air grew colder the higher we went. I could see my breath. That shouldn't have been possible. It was summer. The second floor was a hallway, long, narrow, with warped wallpaper and closed doors on either side, except one. A door halfway down was cracked open. From inside, a faint light flickered. Not a lamp, not a phone, something artificial, mechanical, intermittent. I pressed my ear against the wall. Nothing. I nodded to James. He looked ready to bolt. I pushed the door slowly. It creaked open to reveal an empty room, mostly. By the window sat an old film projector, one of those boxy models from the 70s, humming softly, the reel spinning without anything to project. Instead, someone had rigged a flashlight to the front, pointed straight at the window, blinking in steady patterns. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. My stomach dropped. James cursed under his breath. "That's what we saw," he whispered. I took a step forward. "It's a setup," I said, voice hoarse. He turned to me. "Then where's the person who set it up?" And right on cue. A door behind us slammed open. We turned at the same time. The noise had come from just outside the hallway. One of the other doors. One we hadn't touched. James didn't wait. He sprinted. No whisper, no stealth now. Just pure survival. I followed, heart pounding, adrenaline kicking in so hard I nearly tripped on the top step. Behind us, something moved. Fast, too fast. We didn't look back. We tore down the stairs. My legs screamed. My vision blurred from panic. James hit the floor first, veered toward the window we'd come in through, still locked. Instead, he bolted for the side of the house. I followed, not daring to check behind me. We found another window, lower, cracked. He dove through it shoulder first, the glass shattering slightly. I scrambled out after him, cutting my hand on the frame. And as I cleared the edge, I heard the footsteps slam down the stairs behind us, thudding, heavy, chasing. We hit the grass, running full speed toward the shoreline. The lake never felt so far away. James shouted, "The kayak!" "Where's the kayak?" I looked. It was gone, not just floated away. Gone. I barely had time to process when James shouted again, "Run!" I turned. A man was charging from the side of the house. I only caught a glimpse. Tall, bulky, dressed in black, his face obscured by some kind of hood or mask. No flashlight, no weapon that I could see. But he was fast. Too fast. Without thinking, James threw himself into the lake. Clothes, shoes, everything. I followed. The water hit like knives, ice cold. My lungs seized, heart nearly stopped. I kicked, swam, thrashed, trying not to look back. Behind me, I heard the water splash again. Not once, twice. The water was colder than I thought possible in summer. Every stroke burned. Every breath was a fight. My limbs felt like lead within seconds, my soaked clothes pulling me downward. I looked ahead. James was maybe 20 feet in front of me, thrashing hard, swimming like his life depended on it. Because it did. Behind us, I didn't look. I couldn't. But I could hear the splashes, one, then another. Then silence. That was worse. I pushed harder, vision tunneling, lungs screaming. The far shore looked so far away now, like it was drifting, pulling back from us. James gasped. "Keep going," he shouted. I did. The cold dug deeper into my chest, into my skull. My ears rang. Every kick felt slower than the last. Behind us, the lake remained still. but I knew he was in there. We finally reached James's dock. He clawed up first, slipping, cursing, soaking wet and wild-eyed. I followed, collapsing beside him, coughing water onto the wood. My fingers were white and shaking, my lips numb. Inside, he wheezed. I didn't argue. We stumbled up the hill to the house, dripping lake water, feet crunching the gravel. James fumbled with the key, missed the lock once, twice, then got it. We slammed the door, locked it, bolted it, collapsed against the wall, gasping. Silence. Just our heaving breath and the slow ticking of a wall clock. "I think we lost him," James finally said. I nodded, but something still gnawed at me. Then I remembered. "The kayak," I whispered. "It didn't float away. It was pulled." James went pale. "Or pushed." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. We locked every door, every window, drew the curtains, turned on all the lights. We even grabbed kitchen knives. Not that I believed they'd help if it came to that, but it felt better than nothing. Then we sat, in silence, soaking wet, waiting for something to happen. It didn't. 10 minutes passed, then 20. We stared at the windows, half expecting a face to appear, or a bang on the glass. Or worse, nothing at all. That kind of silence messes with your brain. James finally broke it. "We need to call the cops." "We've been drinking," I reminded him, teeth chattering. "We'll get wrecked if they test us. Not if someone dies." I didn't argue with that. We pulled out our phones. No service, none, not even a single bar. I moved to the router to reset the Wi-Fi. That's when I noticed something. The modem, still on, still blinking. But the network name had changed. Instead of James Guest 5G, like it normally was, the name read, "Stay Quiet." I froze. "James," I called. "You changed the Wi-Fi name?" He shook his head slowly. "Why would I?" I showed him. His face drained of all color. He checked the router himself, reset it. Nothing changed. We unplugged it entirely. Didn't matter. The name stayed. "Stay quiet," all caps, no password. That's when we realized we weren't out of it. Not yet. We stayed huddled in the living room with all the lights on. Still no service, no internet. Nothing but static when James tried the landline phone. I remember looking at the door every few seconds, expecting it to jiggle, creak, burst open, but it never did. Instead, something worse happened. The lights flickered once, then again, and then went completely out. Darkness swallowed the house, total suffocating darkness. "Get the flashlights," James hissed. I scrambled to the kitchen drawer, yanked one open. Nothing. Another. Empty. The emergency drawer had been cleaned out. Like someone had known we'd be here, had prepared. James used his phone screen to light the way. We both stood in the hallway, back to back. The silence was crushing. Then we heard it. A knock. Not at the door. From the inside. It came again, from beneath the floor. 3 slow knocks. Hollow, dull. Like something was underneath the house. Then, a voice. Not loud, not angry, just soft. Wrong house. I don't remember what happened for the next few minutes. Everything went hazy. Panic took over. James grabbed a chair and wedged it under the front door handle. I backed into the hallway wall and gripped the knife like it could save me. We waited like that for what felt like hours. But no one came. Eventually, the power came back. Just like that. Everything hummed back to life. The Wi-Fi name was back to normal. The lights steady. The silence. Whole again. Like nothing had ever happened. James said, "We're leaving at first light." I didn't argue. The sun rose, but it didn't feel like morning. The light outside was pale, hazy. The lake looked motionless, like glass over something buried. We didn't say much as we packed. Threw everything in the car and drove. James didn't even lock the front door. He just slammed it shut and stared at it for a long moment before getting in. As we pulled away, I looked back once. The house was still, but in one of the upstairs windows, I thought. Just for a second. I saw something move, something pulling the curtain back. We got to town, stopped at a diner, and called the police. Told them everything, at least what we could explain. The signal, the house, the man, the chase, the kayak, the Wi-Fi. They sent officers. James's parents got involved, lawyers, complaints, everything you'd expect from people with money and power. And when the cops came back, they said exactly what I already knew they would. There was nothing. No man, no gear, no recent activity, no signs that anyone had been there in years. But the projector, James insisted. They told us the house was completely empty. No furniture, no electronics, no footprints, just dust. Even the dock, collapsed, rotting. They said it would have been too dangerous to walk on, let alone launch a kayak from. They gave us the same lecture everyone always gives. Why didn't you call earlier? Why didn't you wait? Why go into a place like that? James's parents were furious. They pulled all funding from that property, listed it for sale the next week. I haven't been invited back since. A few weeks later, I got a text from James. It was just a photo, the side of the lake house in the dark. A light shining from the second floor. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. I called him. He didn't answer. Sometimes at night, I still close my eyes and see that house. Still see the blinking light. Still wonder what would have happened if we hadn't run. Still wonder what's waiting behind that door we never opened. Because I'm not sure we escaped anything. I think it let us go, and I don't think we were the first.